Airports are supposed to be the great equalizers. Everyone passes through the same security lines, the identical metal detectors, the same fluorescent halls. But at Gate 12, on a humid Saturday afternoon, equality was the last thing on anyone's mind. She stood there, Dr. Maya Thompson, 31 years old, a board-certified cardiologist, wearing simple gray loungewear and sneakers. No designer handbag, no flashy jewelry, just a carry-on and a leather medical bag. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who had worked a 24-hour hospital shift before catching this flight. And that was apparently all it took. The gate agent's voice sliced through the buzz of boarding announcements. "Excuse me, ma'am. First-class boarding is for first-class passengers only." Maya blinked, held up her phone. The bright screen showed her e-ticket, Seat 2A, first class. But the agent didn't even look down. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You'll need to step aside. The economy will board shortly." The words hung heavy in the air. Travelers glanced up from their seats, curious. Some smirked knowingly, others pretended not to hear. Maya's stomach tightened. She had been here before in different forms, in various places. The silent judgment, the unspoken rules about what someone like her was supposed to look like. "I have a ticket," Maya said, her voice steady but low. She extended her phone again, this time closer. "Seat 2A, I upgraded." The agent's expression shifted, not to apology, not to surprise, but to suspicion. "Ma'am, I'll need to see some identification. People try to sneak into first class all the time." Her cheeks burned. People were watching now. A man in a tailored suit muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath. Maya couldn't tell if it was sympathy or mockery. She reached into her wallet, hands trembling, pulled out her driver's license, and placed it on the counter. The agent looked at it slowly, then at Maya again. "Well, you don't look like a first-class passenger." That sentence was louder than the intercom, louder than the rumble of planes outside. Every syllable pressed against Maya's chest like a weight. Didn't look like? What exactly was a first-class passenger supposed to look like? White? Wealthy? Male? Certainly not her, a young black woman in casual clothes. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let the tears surface. She inhaled slowly. "Not here. Not now. Please don't give them the satisfaction." Behind her, a few travelers shifted uncomfortably. A woman whispered, "That's not right." But no one stepped forward. Finally, another gate attendant leaned over, glanced at Maya's ticket, and with a quick motion scanned it. The boarding beep chirped. Approved. The original agent's smile faltered. Maya gathered her things, lifted her chin, and walked down the jet bridge. Every step felt like defiance, but the sting clung to her like static. She slid into her seat. Wide leather cushions, polished wood armrests. She should have felt relief. Instead, her pulse was unsteady. She replayed the words again and again. "You don't look like a first-class passenger." She didn't know it yet, but this flight, this moment of humiliation, was about to collide with something far bigger. Because 2 hours later, 30,000 feet in the air, a medical emergency would strike. And when the call went out, "Is there a doctor on board?" All eyes would turn to her, the woman they doubted, the woman they dismissed, the woman who didn't look the part. And in that instant, everything would change. For the first 20 minutes of that flight, Dr. Maya Thompson sat in silence. She stared out the oval window at the shifting clouds, trying to let the hum of the engines wash away the sting of what had just happened at the gate. But humiliation has a way of replaying itself in your mind like a scratched record, looping over and over until it grinds into your bones. The words repeated like a ghost whisper. "You don't look like a first-class passenger." Maya pressed her palm against her chest, grounding herself. She knew this wasn't new. Not really. For as long as she could remember, People had been deciding what she looked like. Two distinct worlds marked her childhood. In one, she was a star, the kid who aced spelling bees, who raised her hand with answers teachers weren't expecting, who stayed late in the library when everyone else went home. But in the other world, she was underestimated. The girl teachers assumed would struggle, the student some classmates avoided sitting next to, the child whose parents were told maybe she should aim for something a little more realistic. Her father, a postal worker, and her mother, a nurse, never let those words stand in their way. "Don't you ever let anyone shrink you," her mother would say, pulling Maya close at the kitchen table. "Your seat at the table is already waiting. You have to walk into the room." Maya believed her. She had to. By 25, she had a medical degree in her hand, though the journey nearly broke her. The endless hours of study, the grueling rotations, the nights where coffee replaced sleep, those were the expected hardships. But the more challenging part was what no one wrote in the textbooks, the way patients would sometimes glance past her, assuming she was a nurse or an assistant, the way senior physicians would praise the answers of her white classmates but second-guess hers. Once, during her residency, a patient's family actually refused to let her treat their father. "We'd like a real doctor," they'd said flatly. She was standing in the room, stethoscope around her neck, chart in hand. Her attending, an older white physician, had sighed, handed the case to another resident, and whispered to her, "Don't take it personally." But she did. How could she not? And yet Maya never quit. She carved a space in the medical world through sheer force of will, treating patients with compassion, precision, and a calm strength that inspired confidence. She learned to fight with her knowledge, to silence doubt with her skills, and to carry herself with quiet dignity even when people questioned her right to be there. But dignity doesn't always shield you from the sting of bias. That morning at Gate 12 was just another chapter in a book she hadn't asked to write. On the flight, Maya tried to settle. A flight attendant offered her sparkling water with a polite smile, a different face, a different tone than the gate agent, but still cautious, still studying her as though wondering how she'd made it up here. She took the glass anyway, lifted it, and forced herself to focus on the purpose of this trip. She was flying to New York for a medical conference where she would present research on innovative cardiac treatments. The conference wasn't just about science, it was about representation, about showing that doctors like her belonged at the podium, not just in the background, and she needed to be sharp. Still, the incident lingered. She opened her notebook, scribbling thoughts not about her lecture, but about the words at the gate. The ink scratched across the paper. How many times will I have to prove myself? How many times will my seat be questioned, even when I paid for it? A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Rough day," she glanced up. The man in seat 2B, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, dressed in an immaculate navy suit, was watching her, with a faint smile. His tie was loosened, his posture relaxed, but his eyes carried a sharpness that made her instinctively straighten. Maya hesitated. "Keep it professional," she told herself. "Don't overshare." "Something like that," she replied, softly closing her notebook. He nodded as though he already knew. "Airports have a way of showing people's true colors. I've seen enough to last a lifetime." There was something in his tone, experience perhaps, or quiet authority. She didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, she turned back to the window, where the clouds drifted like shifting continents. Her pulse finally began to steady. The worst, she thought, was behind her. But she was wrong, because 2 hours into the flight, a voice would shatter the calm. A flight attendant would run down the aisle, panic etched across her face. A passenger would collapse in the cabin, and that man in seat 2B, the one watching her so closely now, would become the center of everything. And Maya would Be forced to decide whether to step forward after being dismissed, doubted, and humiliated. She had always fought to prove herself, but now, 30,000 feet above the ground, she would face her most public test yet. The first scream tore through the cabin like a shattering of glass. Passengers turned their heads at once. Some unbuckled, others froze in place, eyes wide with fear. A flight attendant rushed past Maya, nearly spilling the tray of drinks in her hand, her voice sharp and trembling. "Is there a doctor on board?" The words seemed to hang in the air. Urgent, desperate, echoing through 30,000 feet of recycled air. Maya's heart lurched. Instinct told her to rise immediately, to push through the aisle and act. She had been trained for this. Years of medical school, sleepless nights in the ER, the steady hands, the quick thinking, the knowledge. This was what she was. And yet, she froze. Her mind snapped back to the gate, to the uniformed staff member who was smirking as they dismissed her, to the way their hand had hovered over her ticket but never bothered to scan it, as if she wasn't worth the verification. "You don't look like a first-class passenger." The words had branded her. Now, as the plea rang out again, "We need a doctor!" Another thought slid in. What if they don't believe me here either? The man in seat 2B turned, eyes narrowing as the scene unfolded. The color drained from his face. He half rose from his seat before a flight attendant rushed past him, heading toward the rear of the cabin. The commotion grew louder. Someone gasped. A child whimpered. A voice, strained, urgent, called out, "He's not breathing right!" Maya's muscles screamed to move, but her mind played tug-of-war. What if they ignore you? What if they laugh, or worse, what if they refuse to let you help and the passenger dies? What if they say you're lying, that you're not really a doctor? She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had sworn an oath. She had promised to heal, to protect, to serve life above all else. And yet fear wrapped around her like iron chains. A flight attendant stumbled back down the aisle, panicked eyes scanning the cabin. She looked directly at Maya, then swept past her as though she couldn't possibly be the answer. Maya's stomach turned. That was it. That was the familiar dismissal. She inhaled sharply, stood halfway, and spoke. "I'm a doctor." The words seemed too soft, too fragile against the roaring panic. The flight attendant barely slowed. "We need a licensed physician, ma'am. Please stay seated." The dismissal hit like a slap. "I am a licensed physician," Maya said louder this time, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Internal medicine, cardiology focus. Let me see him." The attendant blinked, faltered. Her gaze darted to Maya's sweatshirt and leggings, to her natural curls pulled into a bun, and to the absence of a white coat or badge. "You don't—" The attendant stopped herself, but the damage was done. "You don't look like a doctor." Maya stepped into the aisle anyway. "If you waste time doubting me, someone might die." The man in seat 2B rose to his feet suddenly, his presence commanding. "Let her through." The authority in his voice cut through the tension like a knife. The attendant hesitated only a second longer before nodding stiffly. Maya didn't wait for further permission. She pushed past, heart pounding, moving, toward the rear cabin where the cries had started. The scene was chaos. A middle-aged man slumped against his seat, face pale and slick with sweat. His chest rose and fell erratically, each breath a battle. His wife clutched his hand, sobbing, her voice trembling. "Please, someone help him." Passengers craned their necks, some pulling out their phones, while others whispered frantic prayers. Maya knelt beside him, her hands already moving, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can." No response. She turned to the flight attendant, hovering behind her. "Get me the medical kit and oxygen, now," the attendant stammered. We have to confirm," Maya snapped, her voice like steel. "Get the kit. Every second counts." This time the attendant obeyed. Maya's hands worked with practiced precision. She tilted the man's head, checked his airway, felt his pulse, weak, thready. She pressed the oxygen mask over his face, adjusting the flow. Her mind raced through possibilities. Heart attack, arrhythmia, a clot. She glanced at his wife. Does he have a history of heart disease? Any medications? Yes, he has stents and he takes blood thinners. Which one? Clopidogrel. Maya nodded, scanning the emergency kit. She needed to stabilize him until landing, nothing more. Every tool mattered. For a moment, doubt tried to creep back in. She wasn't in a hospital. She didn't have a crash cart, a whole team, or the safety net of a system. She had only her hands, her training, and the stubborn belief that she could not fail. "You belong here," she told herself fiercely. "You always have." The man's breathing steadied slightly under the mask. The wife's sobs softened into shaky breaths of hope. The panic in the cabin quieted, passengers leaning forward with wide eyes, watching this stranger transform into a savior before them. But then, a jolt. Turbulence rocked the plane. The man's pulse fluttered. His eyes rolled back. No. No, stay with me," Maya whispered, pressing 2 fingers to his carotid artery. Weak, fading. She turned sharply. "Defibrillator. Where is it?" The attendant froze, panicked. Maya barked, "Now!" The shout snapped her into motion. Within seconds, the AED was in Maya's hands. She powered it on, placed the pads, and followed the prompts. Analyzing, shock advised, passengers. Gasped. The wife cried out. Maya set her jaw. "Clear!" The jolt coursed through the man's body. His chest heaved. For a long, breathless moment, nothing. Then a cough. A wheeze. The fragile return of rhythm. The cabin erupted in gasps and tears. Maya exhaled, her hands trembling now that adrenaline began to fade. But she didn't let it show. She adjusted the mask, rechecked the pulse. Stronger this time. He was alive, for now. As she stabilized him, she became aware of the silence. Every eye in the cabin was on her. The same faces that had doubted, dismissed, or ignored her were now wide with awe, and behind them all, at the edge of the aisle, stood the man from seat 2B. His gaze wasn't just relieved. It was calculating, assessing, as though the puzzle, pieces in his mind, had finally snapped into place. But Maya didn't know who he was yet. Not yet. She sank back on her heels, breathless, sweat at her temples. She glanced at the flight attendant, who was pale and shaken. "Tell the captain to prioritize an emergency landing. He needs a hospital as soon as possible." The attendant nodded quickly, humbled. No more hesitation. Maya closed her eyes for just a moment, steadying herself. The humiliation at the gate, the dismissal in the cabin, it all burned away, replaced by one undeniable truth. She had saved a life. But the actual storm, the confrontation, the exposure, the twist, was only beginning. Because the man in seat 2B wasn't just any passenger, he was the CEO of the very airline whose staff had doubted her, and he had just witnessed everything. The cabin was still buzzing with nervous energy. The man in seat 2B, the CEO of the airline, finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. The entire first-class section turned to him. Whispers ran through the cabin, curious, tense, alive, with anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice low but commanding, "I want everyone to hear something." Maya's pulse quickened. She had no idea he was planning this. She only knew that all eyes were on her. He continued, locking eyes with the flight attendants. "The actions of my staff earlier at Gate 12 were unacceptable." A hush fell. Even the passengers leaning over the aisle to watch fell silent. The words hung heavy in the recycled air. Maya felt the tension thrum in her chest. This is it. Every doubt, every dismissal, every smirk from earlier. It's all coming to a head. The CEO's gaze softened as it shifted to her. Dr. Thompson, your actions just now, they were exemplary. You saved a life, and you did it despite being doubted and dismissed. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The flight attendant, who had refused to acknowledge her skill, stood frozen, her eyes wide and her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Maya's throat tightened. Relief and pride wrestled with residual anger. She had been humiliated, underestimated, dismissed. And yet here she was, the undeniable hero of this moment. Effective immediately, the CEO continued, all cabin staff will undergo retraining in diversity, emergency protocol adherence, and professional conduct. This is not optional, and it will be documented. Murmurs spread through the cabin. Passengers whispered, some pulling out their phones, their eyes wide with shock. The CEO's assistant filmed discreetly, capturing the moment, a record of accountability in real time. Maya exhaled slowly, trying to ground herself in the reality of what had just happened. She had imagined this moment countless times. Vindication. Yes, but also confrontation, the satisfaction of justice. And now, here it was. Larger, public, undeniable. The gate incident replayed vividly in her mind. The gate agent's smirk, the words, "You don't look like a first-class passenger." Every passenger who had glanced her way at that moment, every silent judgment, seemed trivial now in the wake of what she had accomplished. The flight attendant who had doubted her stepped forward hesitantly. "Dr. Thompson, I'm sorry. I should have listened." Maya looked at her, expression steady, voice calm but firm. "Apologies are a start, but understanding, training, and change, that's what matters now." The CEO nodded in agreement. "Exactly. And we will make sure this is more than just words." A small cheer rippled through the cabin. Passengers who had recorded parts of the incident leaned over to whisper to each other, murmurs of admiration and outrage blending. Many glanced at Maya, with newfound respect, a mixture of awe and gratitude. Some were crying quietly. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief at how she had been doubted. Even the man who had initially smirked at her at the gate, seated in the economy cabin, now watched with a humbled expression, perhaps realizing the depth of his own prejudices. Maya's hands relaxed. The tension that had gripped her chest for the past hour, humiliation, fear, doubt, began to dissolve. Her breathing steadied. She had faced prejudice and had not only survived, but had also forced accountability at the highest level. As she stood beside the injured passenger, who was now stable and conscious under oxygen, she felt a shift. The airline CEO, standing nearby, leaned slightly toward her. His voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. "You handled that perfectly. You didn't let their bias stop you from doing what was right." Maya gave a slight nod, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I just did what any doctor would do." The CEO's eyes met hers directly. Few people dare to act when their authority is questioned, when their credibility is challenged based on appearance alone. You did more than act. You commanded respect. And in that moment, something in the cabin seemed to lift. The passengers around them, the crew, everyone who had been watching, they weren't just witnessing a life being saved. They were seeing a reversal of power, a reckoning. The final twist came subtly, yet with cinematic force. The CEO stepped aside and raised a hand. "Document this. Every crew member who failed to recognize Dr. Thompson's credentials, their names, their actions, their corrective training. I want accountability. On camera. For the record." Maya blinked. The recording device discreetly captured the moment. an undeniable proof of both her skill and the failure of those who had doubted her. The gate agent's smug confidence had been replaced by visible shame as she realized her mistake would be part of a permanent record, one that would be broadcast, scrutinized, and used to enforce real change. Passengers around them murmured, "Again." The power dynamics that had seemed immovable at the gate, the assumptions, the judgments, the whispered biases, had been dismantled in front of their eyes. Maya exhaled, a laugh escaping her lips, quiet but full of triumph. The injured passenger's wife reached out and took her hand. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she whispered, tears brimming. "You did your part by staying calm," Maya replied softly. "I just helped." But inside, she allowed herself a moment to feel the full weight of what had happened. The shame she had carried from the gate, the dismissal by airline staff, the microaggressions, the doubts, all of it had culminated in a singular moment of truth. She had been proven right. She had been vindicated. And everyone watching, everyone, recording, everyone witnessing, they had to see it too. The CEO stepped forward one final time, facing the cabin. "Let this be a lesson," he said, voice echoing over the quiet hum of the engines. "Skill, courage, and professionalism know no appearances, no assumptions, no biases." And with that, the cabin erupted in applause, not raucous, but steady, meaningful, a mix of relief, admiration, and a collective acknowledgement that what had just happened was extraordinary. Maya allowed herself to lean back in her seat, finally. The adrenaline was ebbing. Her heart still pounded, but differently now, not from fear, but from triumph. She had faced prejudice and saved a life. She had turned a moment of humiliation into one of undeniable authority and respect. And somewhere, deep inside, she knew this flight, this incident, this confrontation, it would be remembered. Not just for emergencies, not just for heroism, but for the truth to be seen and acknowledged. For the first time in a long time, she felt wholly, undeniably in her rightful place. The plane touched down at JFK, tires screeching lightly against the tarmac. Maya stayed seated until the paramedics rushed on board, checking the stabilized passenger. Relief washed over her in waves, mingling with the lingering adrenaline that had gripped her for over an hour. Around her, passengers were still murmuring, some filming snippets on their phones, while others stared in awe. The humiliation from Gate 12 felt like a distant memory, now almost surreal. It had been replaced by something heavier, more profound, vindication. The CEO had already spoken to the cabin staff, his voice firm and deliberate, commanding attention. "This is a lesson in respect, training, and recognition. Bias has no place in this airline. We will correct it immediately." Maya watched as the gate agent who had doubted her earlier shifted uncomfortably, the shame visible in her posture. The staff's whispers were hushed but unmistakable. They were being held accountable. Publicly, on record. The paramedics wheeled the passenger off the plane. The man's wife clutched Maya's hand one last time, tears in her eyes. "You saved him. I'll never forget this." "You don't have to," Maya said softly. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had faced life-and-death decisions countless times. "Just make sure he gets proper care." As the cabin emptied, Maya gathered her belongings. The CEO approached quietly, not with fanfare, but with a sense of recognition that carried more weight than words could express. "You handled everything perfectly," he said, voice low but firm. "You showed courage, expertise, and composure. And you did it under pressure that most people couldn't even imagine. I want to make sure your actions are acknowledged beyond this flight." Maya nodded, a small smile forming. The validation felt tangible, yet it wasn't the applause, the recognition, or even the CEO's praise that mattered most. It was the truth finally being seen, the moment where bias met undeniable skill, and justice had been served. For the flight attendants and gate staff, the aftermath was immediate. Retraining sessions were scheduled, and the video of Maya's actions circulated internally. Her bravery had set a new standard, and everyone who had doubted her, knowingly or unknowingly, was now confronted with the consequences of their assumptions. Passengers who had witnessed the event shared their experiences online. Social media buzzed with admiration for Dr. Maya Thompson. News outlets picked up the story. A black doctor, initially doubted because of his appearance, had saved a life mid-flight, and in doing so had forced accountability at the highest level. Maya reflected on the irony. Just hours earlier, she had been dismissed, reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of strangers. Now, her expertise, calm under pressure and courage, had completely turned the narrative. She had become the symbol of resilience, the undeniable proof. That judgment based on appearance was not only wrong, but dangerous. The CEO, standing beside her as the plane emptied, glanced around. "Let this be a lesson not just to our staff, but to the industry," he said. "Competence, courage, and humanity don't wear a uniform or a designer label. They show up when they're needed most." Maya's eyes softened. She had always carried the weight of proving herself, of navigating a world that questioned her place at every turn. Today, she not only proved her worth, but also forced recognition and change. She had turned prejudice into accountability. And for the first time in a long time, she felt wholly seen. The cabin was quiet now, empty seats echoing with the memory of a crisis averted. But the impact stretched far beyond these walls, into boardrooms, social media feeds, and conversations about bias and respect. One small, courageous act had become a catalyst for systemic change. Maya exhaled, letting the tension release from her shoulders. She picked up her bag, walked down the jet bridge, and stepped into the bustling airport terminal. Outside, life moved on as it always did. But inside her, a shift had occurred. Humiliation had been transformed into empowerment, silence into acknowledgement, prejudice into accountability. And as she merged with the crowd of travelers, Maya carried a quiet, powerful truth with her. The right actions, even under the weight of doubt and bias, could change the world. Maya Thompson walked through the terminal, the hum of travelers, luggage wheels, and announcements swirling around her like a distant storm. But she felt calm, grounded, a quiet strength that came from knowing she had faced prejudice and acted with integrity, skill, and courage. Moments like the one at Gate 12, the humiliation, the whispered assumptions, the doubt, they leave marks. They linger in your mind, in your chest, in the way you measure every step you take. But they also reveal something profound. The accurate measure of a person is not in how others perceive them, but in how they rise to the challenge when tested. Maya had risen. And in doing so, she reminded everyone who had doubted her, and those watching, that expertise, courage, and humanity cannot be reduced to appearances. Bias is subtle. It hides in smiles that are not smiles, in words that linger like shadows. You don't look like a first-class passenger. You don't look like a doctor. Statements like these can cause someone to shrink, question themselves, or even falter. And yet, they can also spark change when confronted with truth, action, and persistence. On that flight, Maya transformed a moment of prejudice into one of empowerment. Her skills saved a life. Her composure challenged assumptions. Her presence forced accountability at the highest level. The gate agent, the flight attendants, the passengers, and even the airline CEO had witnessed something undeniable. Actions speak louder than assumptions. For viewers, the lesson is clear. Confront bias. Where you encounter it, stand firm in your truth. Speak up when it matters. But also recognize that courage comes in many forms. Not always loud, sometimes measured, but always intentional. Imagine yourself in Maya's shoes, accused, doubted, and ignored, the adrenaline, the fear, the pulse of public scrutiny pressing down on you. And yet you rise. You do the right thing, not for recognition, but because it is the right thing to do. That is where real strength lies. And consider this. How many times have we judged based on appearances, snap decisions, or assumptions? How often do we fail to see the skill, the value, the human being in front of us? Stories like Maya's compel us to reflect, examine our biases, and understand that every person has worth beyond what our eyes can measure. Maya's story also reminds us that accountability matters. Change is possible when courage meets recognition, when injustice is not ignored, when leaders or witnesses step forward to ensure lessons are learned. The airline CEO's decision to retrain staff publicly was not just a consequence, it was a statement. Bias will not be tolerated. And the recording of that moment ensures the lesson resonates far beyond the cabin walls. The ripple effect is enormous. A single act of courage can inspire countless others to act. It can shift the culture of a workplace, an industry, or a society. And it all begins with refusing to be diminished by prejudice, choosing to act, and insisting on accountability. As Maya exited the airport, blending into the crowd of travelers, the significance of the day stayed with her. She had turned humiliation into triumph, doubt into recognition, and prejudice into change. And while the world moved forward around her, her actions left an imprint, one that would ripple far beyond this single flight. For viewers watching, this story, the takeaway is simple but powerful. Never underestimate the strength of knowledge, courage, and integrity. One person standing up in the face of bias can save lives, inspire change, and rewrite the narrative. So the next time you encounter doubt, in your workplace, in your school, in your community, remember Maya Thompson. Remember the gate, the flight, the disbelief, and the triumph. And ask yourself, what would you do if this happened around you? Would you rise? Would you act? Could you change the outcome? Because the truth is clear. Prejudice can be confronted. Injustice can be challenged, and courage can prevail if we have the resolve to stand.